company and had special interest, they gave it as something to give you your knowledge to. That's one thing that I talked to Stephen Pro about. He was always afraid to give a talk because he was in an industry and didn't want people to think that he was trying to get them to buy the products. I said, Stephen, just lay it out exactly on your knowledge, because if you don't give that knowledge, it's really a disjustice to the Aquarius, because that's what you know the most about. I also want to disclose I am not a chemist. I am a hobbyist just like you, and that's what I'm here for, to give it to you as a hobbyist view on my experiences and things that I've read and seen. So here we go. Let's start. I also added in here with the visit to pH.
This is the calcium alkalinity and magnesium with the visit to pH and strontium seminar.
About 20 to 25 minutes. I did bump it up a little bit more. It will be the shortest talk, and actually is a good talk for Sunday morning, and for the fact that I do get a lot of questions at the end of this. I think when I went to Miami, there was about almost an entire hour of questions that I had to answer, and I love to answer questions because I like to see that enthusiasm of people when they realize and figure things out, and it starts clicking in their head, and they get all excited. They go home and they found and they fixed a problem that really, this is simple. This is not rocket science, so you can do it. Okay, we'll start with calcium. Calcium basically is just a white metal in our waters that help corals and things grow. It's really the first thing that a lot of people get all excited and address right off the bat. That's the first thing they test for, and the only thing they test for. You have to remember, we're trying to recreate the biggest ecosystem there is in the world. One element or 5 elements really is kind of pretty small compared to the formula and the basics and the dynamics of, the largest ecosystem in the world. Here we look at what uses it. Fish here, they use it for their bones. Hard corals, as you see, the sacropora for their stony building structure. Invertebrates for their exoskeleton. And even some soft coral. That is a big mistake that some people think, oh, I only have a soft coral tank, I don't need to worry about calcium. I don't think there's a magic ocean out there that just has soft corals that has low calcium and doesn't benefit. Also, for the fact that if you've ever seen and looked close at some soft corals, such as this sarcophyton, if you've seen these little white, what they're called as sclerites, or not sclerites, spicules. It's like a little grain of rice that's inside the coral. That is what's helping that coral keep its shape, and they use calcium to make those little bitty rice to keep their shape. So if you're, weaning them off of calcium or not worrying about calcium, you're not worried evidently about getting them to grow like they do in the wild. And I don't think there's anybody here that, that's their objective. Also, I don't know, a few years ago, Tom Wyatt, I talked to him back in 2000 about this. He was just doing mushrooms and he wasn't focusing on calcium. I said, well, give it a try and see what happens. Tom is a real freak when it comes to his propagating mushrooms. What he calls failure is only about 10% off from his success. So he has a very tight window. Basically, he takes a mushroom and cuts them up to 30 or 40 different ones under a microscope. His failure rate, he says, if it's at 30% that don't make it out of those 30 or 40 is bad. So about 10% more is his good success rate. So he gets about 80% by doing that, and that is quite amazing. Even back then, back in 2000. To get back to the original point, he wasn't focused on calcium. I said, give it a try, get everything balanced out and see what happens. He emailed me 2 weeks later and he said, I cannot believe it. They puffed up more, everything seemed to be doing better, colors. It does make a difference. do we measure it? Very easy with test kits. Parts per million is the actual scale that we're using. Range will be 375 parts per million roughly to 550 parts per million. I put 550 parts per million as a max. That is because some people like to drive it extremely high and high to the very end, which is 550 parts per million. If you're out there and you use a test kit and you say, oh great, I've got 800 parts per million of calcium, I'm doing something right. Well, actually something is wrong. Either one, your test kit is faulty, which is usually the biggest case, or two, your alkalinity is so low that it's not naturally helping you balance out your calcium. So 550 basically is about the max point, but for your alkalinity tends to keep it down. Alkalinity. Alkalinity, big issue. I think it's probably one of the most important things I can say for you to try to do and follow. If you're new and you do not have the money for test kits, go into the store and have them test other things. But the first thing I would say to get is the alkalinity. It's the cheapest, it's the easiest. It is the one that tends to fluctuate more. There's a lot of things that can fluctuate the alkalinity. What alkalinity is basically a measurement for you to know how to keep your pH high and stable. The measurements that are out there, some of them are misleading. I don't want you to go home and say, oh, the test kit I have is terrible. It is the wrong measurement. Most of the test kits out there that go from that blue titration to your yellow, all those test kits basically are designed for alkalinity. That alkalinity measurements that we see are parts per million, some test kits out there. Parts per million really could be misleading because of the fact that most people use that for freshwater, swimming pools, and planet tanks. They use that measurement for planet tanks to know when to add CO2 to their plant system. And really it's kind of been out of date, just like these next two measurements. These next two, I doubt you'll ever find a test kit out there that even will give you a reading in there. The next one is DKH. If you have a DKH test kit, fine, don't worry about it. Like I said, most likely you have that one that goes from the blue to the yellow, and it's really based on the true measurement of alkalinity. DKH, because back in early 80s and 80s in general, that seems to be what the Germans were using. So I think it's like a popular thing out there that people like to use as a buzzword. If you use that, that's fine. It's not that it's wrong. It's just if you are very particular and want to know the exact, I really think it would be nice if everyone went to using milliequivalents a liter. That is the actual true measurement for alkalinity. Because what happens is this guy comes in and he starts asking questions. He asks questions to other aquarists. Well, it's this amount of parts per million or this amount DKH. If you only know one measurement of milliequivalents, then parts per million is in the hundreds number. DKH can easily get mixed up with milliequivalents if your DKH is extremely low or your milliequivalents is extremely high. So it can get confusing and mistakes can be made. I've seen it happen. So what do we really want to do? Again, milliequivalents a liter. Not that you're wrong for using the other ones. As long as you realize that when you go to ask someone a question, if that's all they know to help you out, really try to use something that's the standard and the true measurement. There are conversion rates that you can use, and being that most of those test kits are made for milliequivalents a liter, they just convert it and put the fancier name or a different name on there. You can learn the conversion. DKH conversion, since I know that off my head, is 2.8. So if you have a DKH of 10, you divide 2.8, and that will be your actual milliequivalents. Again, I do this just because of how much confusion that ends up getting out there. No, we're not going to say that you're wrong and terrible for using DKH or parts per million, but again, we want to try to get people to understand more, to get on the same page, because as aquariums advance, you're going to run into the fact that we're going to be testing more and more different chemicals, more and more different parameters, and let's take care of some basics and get them taken easy. Range would be 3.0 to 4.5. That is higher than natural seawater, and I recommend that because of the fact that we are taking a lot of organisms and putting it in a tiny little glass box with very little water compared to what they're used to in the wild. In the wild, yes, a lower range is okay to a point. Now there's some professors that will disagree and say that our oceans, the alkalinity